Auschwitz. The very sound of the word chills the blood, and it's become a synonym for man's depravity towards man. It was one element in a vast industry, the economic system that sustained the Third Reich. Does it still defy and challenge our imaginations? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Systematic annihilation. Between 1933 and 1945, Germany built around 44,000 camps and other incarceration sites across Europe. The Germans designed 3 types of camps, most often built with accompanying railways or next to pre-existing lines. Concentration camps were intended for registering, classifying and reassigning people to other camps. Although not the camp's purpose, forced labour and death from extreme labour were common. From there, the Deutsche Reichsbahn, i.e. the German state railway, would then transport Jews and other inmates to labour or death camps. In the former, they would be used to extract maximum labour at minimum cost to serve Germany's war effort, building roads, bridges, railways and military infrastructure, draining swamps, mining coal and extracting granite in quarries. Hundreds of thousands would die from exhaustion. If not to labour, then prisoners would be sent to extermination camps, the most notorious of which, Auschwitz-Birkenau, was established in occupied Poland, arriving in the German death camp from as far as Greece, Italy and Russia, but predominantly from Hungary and Poland. Most of the prisoners would be immediately sent to the gas chambers. Others would be forced to work in the camp until they were marked for death. Around 1 in 6 Jews murdered in the Holocaust died in Auschwitz. Jews from various countries, Poles, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war and others made up a total of 1.3 million people deported to Auschwitz. Of that number, approximately 1.1 million were murdered in the camp. In January 1945, as the tides of war turned, the Soviet Vistula Oder offensive forced the Germans to abandon Auschwitz. By January 12th, Soviet forces crossed the Vistula River and quickly overran German defences, capturing swathes of territory and closing in on Auschwitz. Anticipating the Soviet offensive, the SS hurried to evacuate approximately 58,000 prisoners from Auschwitz and its sub-camps. The forced journey westward to camps in Germany turned into a death march, one of many during the final phase of the war. If not from exhaustion, prisoners succumbed to starvation or were outright executed. Despite the Germans' attempts at erasing all evidence, the sheer size of Auschwitz's infrastructure and the grim remnants of its operations made it impossible to fully hide the horrid truth. On January 27, 1945, when the Soviets arrived in the camp, they found some 7,000 prisoners. Their emaciated bodies a testament to their exceptional resilience and the evil that had been done.
Joining us today is Marcin Zaborowski. He's the Europe editor here at TVP World. Welcome to the programme.
Pleasure to be here.
Horrific, gigantic system that the Germans created. But where does the historiography and the history of the whole death camp system fit into our history of the Second World War? Has it evolved? Was it ignored at the beginning? How has it changed in interpretation over the last 80 years or so?
I think it has. I think that when we look into the goals of the Allies in the since the creation of a great alliance between the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain. So that's around 1942, 1943. So when we look into the materials from conferences, from the meetings, from things that they established, the issue of Holocaust was present there. They were aware, but it wasn't at the forefront. It wasn't at the forefront of the Allied goals. The goal number one was to win the war, and then, of course, there was the expectation that other things would fall into order, and prevention, the continuation of Holocaust, as much as it was unlikely to happen in any case. But it wasn't really the goal of any of the Allies. Certainly wasn't the goal of American President Roosevelt. It wasn't certainly the goal of Joseph Stalin. I think that one who had most sensitivity about it was Winston Churchill.
Why was that? What was the...
I think he was probably best informed. He was best informed. I mean, people like Karski spoke to him directly. Some also the Jewish survivors of Auschwitz and other camps, they had direct link there. The British intelligence was there from the very beginning, and that really wasn't the. I think that this moral imperative was important for Churchill. I'm not so sure it was so super important for Roosevelt. To start with, as we know, the United States did not really go into the war willingly. It was dragged into the war. It was actually Nazi Germany which declared war on the United States, and the spirit in the United States was such that much of the public opinion was either unaware of what was happening in Europe, or it didn't want to know. And also, actually, within the American administration, that was still a slight, maybe not even slight, there was another current of anti-Semitism.
And what was the, how did the history of the Holocaust, or when did the term the Holocaust gain ground? Was it a post-war term? Was it current during the war itself?
It really gained on the grounds in the 1960s, 1970s. I mean, initially, and we could see it, for example, with the trial of a major Nazi criminals in Nuremberg, that looked like in Nuremberg, but the awareness of the Holocaust, of the extermination, was a shock. It was a shock to the public opinion. People really, it wasn't a widespread knowledge.
Yeah.
So when it came out with Nuremberg, and that's why Nuremberg was so important. And also Nuremberg was one of these very rare examples when all the Allies still cooperated, because it was before actually the Cold War, took over the entire system. So. So yes, Nuremberg was this first sort of major step towards a major public awareness. Then we had the Cold War for many years. People didn't know what would be what is our security? What is it? What we are? What is the world we want to live in? Yeah. And I guess that at that time, focusing on the issue of Holocaust, of extermination, wasn't really still something which people wanted to focus on.
Was this true as well in post-war Israel, in the post-war Israeli interpretation of the events of the Second World War?
It was, of course, different for Israel. In many respects, Israel is funded on the assumption that another Holocaust can never happen again. And anybody who went to Yad Vashem near Jerusalem knows about it. But this is a foundational, I don't want to say myth, a foundational element there. For Israel itself. There will be probably no Israel as we know it today without Holocaust, and I think that the Israeli politicians are very well aware of that.
And what about this? We must touch on the idea of the concept, the phrase Polish concentration camp. When I first heard this phrase about the Holocaust as a kid, I thought it was just a linguistic lapse. But is it just a laziness on the part of Western historians or Western commentators?
Mostly it is. Because as it happens, much of the Holocaust actually happened on the extermination of Jews happened on the territory of occupied Poland.
Yes.
Which, if you look into the facts, is probably not very surprising, because this is the place where we had the largest population of Jews.
Yes.
Again, directing anybody to Yad Vashem, they would see that more than 1/3 of the entire Jewish population in Europe was actually residing in Poland. It was like 10% of the entire Polish population. So it was a lot. Yeah? Auschwitz obviously became this symbol of the Holocaust, this deadly symbol of Holocaust, and Auschwitz, in Polish Oświęcim, is a city in Poland, was in the occupied Poland. So mostly it's through linguistic really laziness that the commentators did not really want to, or were not paying attention, to distinguish between the fact that they were not camps set up by Poles, but they were camps which happened on a Polish territory.
Poland didn't exist either, did it?
Poland didn't exist, was under the German occupation. But some of that also fits into a false narrative about what actually happened in the war. So, for example, partially because of his laziness, but also because of some personal stories, much population of today's Israel believe that Poles willingly participated in the Holocaust. And we may think that our teaching of history is not very precise, it's not very consistent, but when you talk to the Israelis, you see that there are other nations in which the teaching of history is also not very, very precise, to say the least. And that's a really still an ongoing element within the public sphere in Israel.
We'll carry on with this thread, but first of all, we'll see our second clip, and we'll talk a bit more about the Allied policy as we touched upon in the first half of the discussion.
Around 75,000 ethnic Poles were killed in Auschwitz, but some historians estimate the number could be as high as 150,000. This figure does not include the 300,000 Polish Jews who held Polish citizenship. Witold Pilecki, a Polish army officer and member of the Polish resistance movement, the Home Army, risked becoming a number in that death toll by volunteering to be sent to the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp. He arrived at the turn of September 21st and 22nd, 1944. His mission, to bring hope to fellow prisoners, establish an underground resistance in the camp in preparation for an uprising, and collect data on the atrocities committed inside the wire. Sent through couriers via Sweden to Britain, Pilecki's reports were the first to reach the Allies, revealing the systematic extermination of Jews perpetrated in Auschwitz. Even before Pilecki, the Allies heard accounts of murders so staggering that the number eluded their understanding, seeming beyond credible. Pilecki was aware of the prejudice.
When I left Oświęcim on April 27, 1943, 97,000 numbered prisoners had already been killed. This does not account for the numbers of people who were gassed and burnt en masse without having been registered in the records. More than 2 million of them died. I gave these figures cautiously in order not to overestimate them.
But there were also political reasons for not prioritizing the liberation of Auschwitz and other camps. One was that British PM Winston Churchill's government feared that overemphasizing Jewish victimhood would fuel domestic anti-Semitism, undermine public support, and strengthen Nazi propaganda claiming Britain fought for the Jews. In the US, it was President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's friend, ardent nativist Breckinridge Long, who in his capacity as Assistant Secretary of State implemented policies making immigration to the US virtually impossible for refugees and migrants. In late 1943, a handful of Treasury Department career officials were horrified by reports of the mass slaughter of Jews by the Nazis. When attempting to fund the release of some 70,000 Romanian Jews from Nazi hands, they were effectively blocked by Long. Finally, many Allied decision-makers believed that only by winning the war militarily could the atrocities be curtailed. Concerns about stretching Allied war capacity thin and fears that rescuing victims could divert vital resources ultimately contributed to the decision not to liberate any death camp, including Auschwitz, before Allied ground forces physically reached the area and took control. Auschwitz-Birkenau, where, according to historians, an estimated 1.1 million people were killed, was the last extermination camp to be liberated on January 27, 1945. This date became the International Day of Commemoration of the victims of the Holocaust. The total number of people murdered in all of the German concentration and death camps is some 3.5 million. History knows not how many of them could have been saved had the Allies acted upon Pilecki's reports sooner.
I'd like to pick up on this point that you made just before we watched this second clip about the teaching of history. We know from eyewitness accounts what was happening. Was this willfully ignored as a matter of policy? And how does this mean that the teaching of history gives way to pop culture, the films, novels, fictionalized work about Auschwitz and the Holocaust?
I start with the first element here. Was it willfully ignored? Looking at historical accounts, it looks like that simply for the Allies it really wasn't the primary objective to stop the Holocaust. Having said that, we also have to be realistic. What could they have actually achieved if it was the objective? It could have delayed the war effort and bombing the death concentration facilities could be ineffective because they could have been rebuilt.
Yes.
As it in fact happened in a number of camps other than Auschwitz. That the facility was being bombed and then was rebuilt. One element which the scale of Holocaust could have been to some extent minimized because of the one element here, meaning the transfer of Hungarian Jews after the occupation of Hungary in 1944.
So the question about bombing the communication.
Yes, if the communication lines were being bombed, then many of these Jews could have been saved, and the Allies at this point in time had the ability to do that, and they didn't do that. Yeah, and it's one of these things that that people may say that that was a huge mistake, and a lot of people died because of that, But it's easy to say so from the hindsight, and one has to think about at the time, 1944, it wasn't really that clear that Germany was about even to be defeated.
Yes. I mean, does this mean that there's a gulf of a misunderstanding between the Polish side, the Jewish side, the Eastern European side, and the higher command in the Western camp? Did they just not understand each other's points of view?
Well, I think for those who are the Holocaust activists and so on, I mean, there was an absolutely imperative in this was to stop the Holocaust, and that was what the war should have been about. Yeah? But really, for many Allies, that war was about defeating the Nazi Germany and creating the world in which things like Holocaust could never happen again. And I think that we will never find an understanding between these two sides of the moral argument here, because they are just so different and come from so different places, really. Yes, I'm not sure that responds to your question.
Yes, I mean, it's something that it's easy, as you say, to make the case to bomb the railway lines or to bomb the camp itself. But nonetheless, the Allies, it was far down on the wish list of the Allied policymakers, wasn't it? So.
It wasn't the primary objective for any of the leaders, and as you could see from your feature here, they were kind of pushing the issue of Holocaust to the back of their mind. Yeah, they didn't want to believe in that. Roosevelt certainly did not want to believe in that. He did not want it to filter into the public opinion in his country. He wanted to keep it away. And Stalin obviously didn't really care, because it's not one of the. It wasn't his nature to do so.
Anything,
Why did? And Churchill just didn't have the power to do anything about it.
And what was the motivation for Roosevelt keeping it hidden from the public awareness?
It was probably two things. So number one, still, this is the United States of the 1940s, where anti-Semitism was a strong factor, and openly anti-Semitic candidate for almost won a Republican primary, Mr. Lindbergh, who flew over the Atlantic and was very friendly with the Nazis. Yes. So Roosevelt knew about it. But at the same time, he didn't want to make the war effort about this issue. For him, it was difficult enough to actually convince American public opinion to do more than to defend the United States against Japan, but to participate in war effort against the Nazis in Europe.
As we draw our discussion to a close, what's your view of how we commemorate the Holocaust liberation today? Last year we had a huge commemoration. Many crowned heads of Europe, as you mentioned, heads of state, that sort of thing. How do you see it evolving once the living memory, it's out of living memory, it becomes history, it becomes pop culture? How do you see? Is it going to just be relegated into another event in the Second World War?
Well, no, I'm pretty sure there will be, as long as we have the world as we know it, I think there will be another massive commemoration happening in 19 years. So it's, in a sense, almost around the corner. Yeah. But it was this formative watershed event which changed a lot of things. It really changed, for example, international law. So we have now the Convention Against Genocide. Yes. We have the term genocide. Yes. We actually have the term genocide, and we have a criminalization of genocide. So these things were not in international law prior to the argument being made against about the Holocaust. We have International Crime Court, and we have International Criminal Justice. The Nuremberg that we mentioned here was the first ever occurrence of citizens of other countries being brought to justice by international court. That didn't happen before. So, and it was the Soviets, it was the Americans, the British, and the French, all of who agreed to do it together. And it was very, very controversial at the time. Yes. Because, in some respects, we had a court verdict, the ruling, and justice delivered without the law, because the international criminal law did not exist at this point in time. For a lot of the Supreme Court American judges, it was a blasphemy. So it revolutionized a lot of things in our perception on the level of law, legality, history, morality. Yes. And I think that without the attention given to Holocaust, we wouldn't have the same attention to things like, for example, genocide in Rwanda, genocide in former Yugoslavia.
Yes. Marcin Zaborowski, we have to unfortunately draw to a close there, but thank you very much for coming onto the programme.
Thank you.
That's it. That's all the time we have for today. Join us next time, Tuesdays 9:35, 21:35 CET. Join us then.